For, wow, 2,000 years, one name has echoed through history and shaped our world more than any other: Jesus Christ. But who was he really? The divine Son of God? The Messiah? Or was he a myth, a story created by his followers? It's one of the biggest questions ever asked, and today we're going to explore one book's incredibly detailed answer.
So, this is the question it all boils down to. Was Jesus of Nazareth a real person, a figure who actually walked the earth and fulfilled ancient prophecies? Or are the stories we have about him more like the myths of Greek and Roman gods, powerful tales, but not, you know, history?
For this explainer, we're going to be using one key source as our guide. It's the book Jesus Christ, Messiah or Myth. Now, our goal here is to really walk you through the evidence and the arguments that the author lays out to build their case that Jesus was, in fact, a real, verifiable figure of history. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at how scholars have tried to find the historical Jesus. Then we'll get into the Gospels themselves. Are they history or myth? After that, we'll tackle the big one: the problem of miracles. Then we'll see what evidence exists outside the Bible. And finally, we'll pull it all together for the source's final conclusion. All right, first up, the quest for the historical Jesus. And this isn't just one single search. It's actually a series of different scholarly movements that have happened over the centuries, all trying to peel back the layers and find the man behind the story. What's so interesting here is you can literally see the evolution of thought. The first quest was all about rationalism, the idea that if you can't explain it with human reason, it didn't happen. So Jesus was just a good moral teacher. Then the second quest came along and tried to split him in two: the Jesus of history versus the Christ of faith. But now, the current approach, the third quest, is all about understanding Jesus as a real person living in his actual time and place: first-century Jewish culture. Now, our source points out something really crucial about those first two quests. They began with what's called an anti-supernatural bias. This basically means you decide from the get-go that miracles are impossible, before you even look at a single piece of evidence. So, according to the book, this wasn't really a conclusion they reached. It was a rule they started with, which of course shaped everything else. So let's shift gears and look at the main records we have of Jesus' life, the four Gospels. How does our source material classify them? Are they historical accounts, or are they just myths?
And here's where the source makes a really important point. You can't judge an ancient document by today's standards. It argues the Gospels fit perfectly into a genre that was very common back then: Greco-Roman biography. Now, these weren't like modern biographies full of childhood stories and deep psychological analysis. Nope. They focused on a person's public life, their teachings, and their character, especially as revealed by their death.
This chart does a fantastic job of showing the difference between the Gospels that made it to the Bible and other writings like the Gnostic Gospels. See, the canonical Gospels date back to the 1st century. They're steeped in Jewish culture and prophecy, and the style is pretty restrained. But the Gnostic Gospels, they show up way later, in the 2nd century, and they're full of secret knowledge and pretty wild stories that are totally disconnected from that original Jewish context. So why are there 4 of them? Our source explains that they aren't contradictory, they're complementary. Each was written with a specific audience in mind. Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience, constantly connecting Jesus to Old Testament prophecies. Mark is writing for Romans. It's fast-paced, all action. Luke presents Jesus as the Savior for everyone, Jews and Gentiles alike. And John gives us this deep, theological look at Jesus as the Son of God. It's like 4 artists painting a portrait of the same person from slightly different angles. Okay, let's dive into what is probably the biggest roadblock for a lot of people when it comes to the Gospels: the miracles. I mean, how are we supposed to take these accounts seriously as history? Let's see how our source handles this. This quote from the philosopher David Hume pretty much sums up the argument against miracles. His point is simple: if we haven't seen it happen over and over again in our own experience, then it's just not believable. Our personal, everyday experience becomes the ultimate judge of what's possible. But the book brings in this amazing counterargument from a guy named Simon Greenleaf, who helped found Harvard Law School. He looked at the Gospels the way a lawyer would look at witness testimony, and his logic was pretty powerful. He argued that if you believe a creator God exists, well, then it's perfectly logical that this creator could act outside of the laws of nature that he himself put into place. So for Greenleaf, saying miracles can't happen wasn't a conclusion based on evidence, it was a philosophical belief you started with. Okay, so what about evidence for Jesus completely outside the New Testament? I mean, Did anyone else at the time mention him? According to our source, the answer is a definite yes, and it's pretty significant.
So what is this number, 141? Well, it represents the number of New Testament papyrus fragments that we have today. And we're not talking about copies from the Middle Ages. These are tiny, ancient pieces of physical evidence that take us way, way back, incredibly close to when the original documents were actually written. And take a look at this. This is the John Ryland fragment. It's the oldest piece of the New Testament ever found, dated to around 125 AD. Now, what makes this little scrap so important is that it was found in Egypt, hundreds of miles from where the Gospel of John was written. This proves that John's Gospel was being copied and was circulating widely just a few decades after it was originally composed. That's a huge blow to the theory that it was a much later invention. Now, this might just be the most powerful evidence of all. These are non-Christian sources. You could even call them hostile witnesses. Tacitus, a famous Roman historian, confirms that the founder of Christianity, Christus, was executed under Pontius Pilate. And Josephus, a major Jewish historian, casually mentions the death of James, who he identifies as the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ. Think about it. These guys had absolutely no reason to help the Christian cause, yet they confirm the central facts of the story.
So let's bring it all home. Where does all of this lead? The source's conclusion isn't based on just one thing, but on how all these different pieces of evidence fit together to form a coherent picture.
The book's final argument is that you have to look at the cumulative case. It's not about one single piece of proof, but a whole web of evidence pointing in the same direction. You've got the Gospels fitting a known historical genre. You have the incredibly early manuscript evidence. You have non-Christian historians confirming the basic facts. And you have a solid philosophical counter to the idea that miracles are simply impossible. When you put it all together, the source concludes that the evidence points overwhelmingly not to myth, but to a real, historical Jesus Christ.
And so we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. What changes when you stop looking at the New Testament as a single religious book and start looking at it as a collection of ancient documents supported by external historical corroboration? According to the analysis we've explored today, it changes everything. Thank you so much for joining us.